Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
After the wife was escorted away by an unknown man, the neighbor saw what she would soon tell her husband. Today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. I was really hoping for a bonus tonight, but honestly doubted it. I put on my dark blue tuxedo that I hadn't worn in 3 years. I have to admit I looked quite good, if I do say so myself, but I really didn't enjoy dressing up like this. After all, today was Friday, and I was supposed to be sitting in my favorite rocking chair enjoying a quality single malt whiskey. Instead, I found myself around a table with coworkers and their spouses at a benefit dinner and danced for blessings in a backpack. It was one of the biggest social events of the year in our small Midwestern town, and virtually every important person from the region was present. My boss made a reservation for this event, and both my wife and I were expected to be there. I had specifically told my wife to buy a new dress for the evening, and she did not disappoint. To be honest, she might have gone a bit overboard with her choice. As she came downstairs after changing, I remarked, I was talking elegant, not a showstopper. At 35, my wife was at the peak of her beauty. Her thick red hair was styled high on her head, and she wore long gold earrings that highlighted her neck. The low scoop neckline of her silky burgundy dress revealed a significant amount of her figure, and the hem, which ended mid-thigh, showcased all the time she spent working out. I expected her to get a dress, but this one was definitely a statement. Of course, I looked and knew that any other man would also appreciate the view. I never minded other men looking at my wife as long as she remembered that I didn't share my toys. I made this clear to her often. I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. While I would have preferred to sit at home in my chair, Esther was exactly where she wanted to be, mixing with the city's elite. As a high school teacher, she didn't get many opportunities to go out, but she was a natural social butterfly, well-read, witty, and attracted people like ants to a picnic. We chatted a bit and hit the dance floor a couple of times before I went to the bar and Esther returned to the table. When I got within a few feet of our seats, I saw her talking animatedly to the man sitting in my place. It was U.S. Senator Thomas Norberto, who looked like the Latino Tom Selleck from his Magnum PI days. He was incredibly handsome, single, and 6 feet 4 inches. Some considered him a candidate for the next presidential race, more for his looks than his intelligence. I stood a few feet away, expecting my wife to at least notice my presence, but she didn't. In fact, I had never seen my wife look so engaged before, practically making moon eyes at the senator during their conversation. Since neither of them was going to acknowledge me, I did it myself. "Sorry, Senator, but this is my seat," I said as I reached my seat with 2 drinks in hand. He completely ignored me and continued talking to my wife, whose face was lighting up. I waited silently for another 5 seconds before I stopped being polite. I passed my hand holding the glass between their faces, breaking their spell, and placed her glass on the table in front of her. I stayed right between them, holding my drink, before the honorable senator got the hint. "I have to go. I have to find my place at the head table, but I'll be back later to continue this conversation," he told my wife, essentially ignoring me the entire time. "Stupid man," I grumbled as I sat back down after he left. "I find him charming," she replied. "On the other hand, you were downright rude to a senator. For God's sake, you seem to have forgotten that you are my husband, not him, and he was sitting in my seat and wouldn't leave. This is incredibly rude and arrogant, even if he thinks he's going to be the next president." She made that look some women do very skillfully, and I hated it. I had told her this many times during our 9 years of marriage. I looked at her sternly, not wanting to argue in front of everyone. She snorted but remained silent. Dinner lasted about 90 minutes before the band started playing again and people returned to the dance floor. I knew Esther loved to dance, so I stood up and extended my hand to her. She looked at my hand, looked me in the eyes, and shook her head decisively. I stomped my foot and walked back to the bar, ordering another drink. While standing there and making small talk with others who were also hanging out, I lost sight of Esther when she stood up, what I thought was for a conversation. However, it was easy to keep an eye on the senator, who had his security guards nearby. The senator chatted and shook hands for the next half hour before stepping out onto the open veranda. When Esther didn't return to the table after 10 minutes, I decided to check the veranda. There they sat in deep conversation with an elderly couple, and the senator's hand was casually resting on my wife's waist. I approached the couple and began to remove the senator's arm, but someone grabbed me and twisted my arm behind my back, causing me to cry out in pain and attracting the attention of those around me. "No one messes with the United States Senator, buddy," a voice growled behind me, pushing me toward the exit. "It's my wife he's holding onto," I muttered as I was pushed outside. He shoved me back into the main ballroom before letting me go. I told him to bring my wife to me if he didn't want me to start causing a scene. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath as he walked towards the senator. 2 minutes later, Esther returned through the door, looking red with shame. She shrugged as if she didn't understand what was going on. I grabbed her hand and nearly pulled her out of the ballroom. The ride home was silent, but I knew it wouldn't last long. For some reason, Esther thought the best defense was offense. "How could you? You embarrassed me in front of a United States Senator tonight," she screamed at me. Up until this point, I thought Esther and I had a good marriage. Yes, we had our moments like any other couple, but I would have bet on us lasting until the end. Not anymore. "You must understand that you are my wife," I objected. "No one, and I don't care if it's the President of the United States, should be so familiar with you. You know it's crossing the line, but you didn't do anything to stop it. You acted like a teenager infatuated with a high school crush," I said. She blushed and stammered but eventually lowered her head and didn't respond. I knew I had hit the nail on the head. She was definitely fascinated by this man. If I thought Esther would apologize at some point, I was wrong. Not only did she not apologize, but she barely spoke to me for the next few days. Even the children, despite being only 7 and 5 years old, sensed something was wrong and tried to avoid the room if we were both nearby. Lunchtime was the only time there was any real conversation between us, as we both seemed to be trying to communicate through the kids. However, on Wednesday night after the kids went to bed, Esther said we needed to talk. "Can't we talk? Shouldn't we talk? We just need to talk." Nothing good ever follows these words, and in fact, nothing good came from them. My loving wife informed me that she and the honorable senator would be going on a date on Friday evening. "It's not a date. In fact, I'm accompanying him to one of these charity dinners," Esther said when I questioned the appropriateness of a married woman going on a date with someone who wasn't her husband. "That sounds like a date to me," I explained. "If you accompany him, it means you are his companion. And since you are married, you're putting yourself in an inappropriate situation." "You're the one with the sick mind," she screamed back. "I would never cheat on you. What do you call a married woman going on a date with another man? Even if there's no intimacy, going on a date with another man is cheating," I argued. "Would you let me accompany your friend Angie to dinner and dancing?" She twisted her mouth, frowned, and looked at me with narrowed eyes. I knew mentioning her friend Angie would get her attention. Angie was known for her charm, and Esther had issues with her. "This is completely different, and you know it. This would be a date." "This would be with a senator," Esther said. "Oh, that's right, a huge difference," I replied. "Esther, you can't date another man, whatever you want to call it. We're married. We made vows, remember? The rejecting everyone else thing? You don't own me, Reggie. Even if we're married," she snorted. "If I want to do something, I'll do it. I'm not your possession." "That's what you get when you marry someone who loves puzzles," I said. "You're really not my possession, but you're the mother of my children, and I'd hate for you to destroy our family." Her eyes widened in surprise, and it looked like I had gotten her attention. "You won't be so stupid," she said mockingly. "This is a turning point in our marriage," I said firmly. She frowned again but didn't respond. I never saw this coming. My eyes nearly fell out of my head when Esther came downstairs on Friday night, dressed for her date. She wore a low-cut, strapless white lace dress that accentuated her figure. I had never seen this dress before and assumed she had bought it specifically for the occasion. "Hell," I whispered in admiration. She took my remark as a compliment and made a slow turn. At that moment, our children ran into the room, saw Esther, and stopped in their tracks. "Wow, Mom, you look beautiful," our 7-year-old Alice exclaimed. "Why are you dressed up like a princess?" Esther looked first at our daughter, then at me, apparently expecting me to cover for her. This did not happen. I just looked at my wife. I can't tell her, Esther began. You can't because you know it's wrong, I snapped. Explain to your daughter why you're leaving us to go on a date with the senator. Mom has to go out for a while to a fancy party, Esther said. Be a good girl for Daddy, and I'll see you tomorrow morning when you wake up. Why doesn't Daddy come with you? Our 5-year-old Nate suddenly asked. Esther hesitated, trying to come up with a good answer. I didn't need time to come up with the truth. Because Mom doesn't love us enough, I replied. Both children looked at Esther with shocked, hurt expressions. She looked at me with the same expression. Really hurts, doesn't it? I asked. At that moment, the doorbell rang. The 4 of us froze in place before it rang again. Moment of truth, dear, him or us, I said. Esther answered the door on the 3rd ring. I saw one of the senator's guards at the door and noticed a black limousine in the driveway. Remember, be good for Daddy. See you tomorrow morning, Esther said before she left. It looked like it was him. I was shocked for about a minute before realizing that I still had children who needed attention. I wished I could drown my sorrows in a cupboard of alcohol, but that wasn't an option. What would actually happen is a couple of video calls, one with each of our parents. After all, children love communicating with their grandparents on FaceTime. I started with Esther's parents. We had always had a good relationship, and I knew Esther's little adventure wouldn't go down well with them. We laughed and joked for about a minute until Esther's mother realized her daughter wasn't on the call. Where's my daughter, Reggie? Did you put her in a suitcase? My mother-in-law joked. No, Mom. Esther went on a date with Senator Thomas Norberto. She'll be back tomorrow, I think, I said quietly. What? Exclaimed my mother-in-law. A date? Are you sure? She calls it accompanying a handsome senator to a charity dinner. I call it a date, maybe something more, I blurted. And she won't be back until tomorrow? You just let her go? My perplexed father-in-law shouted. I tried to reason with her, Dad, but she told me that I didn't own her, I replied. I told her she's abandoning her family, but she seems to think it's a forgivable offense. The kids then took over the conversation for the next 5 minutes, for which I was grateful. My mother-in-law sent the children to their rooms for a few minutes and returned to talk about my wife. Don't do anything rash or stupid, she advised. Talk to her, Reggie. Don't just leave her. Think about the kids. What did she do when she walked out the door, Mom? My mother-in-law didn't have time to answer before I ended the call. My mother, on the other hand, was less restrained when I called her. I know the name of a good lawyer, she immediately suggested. She was Aunt Ella's lawyer during her divorce from Uncle Will. Yes, that's good to know, I said. I was devastated by the state of my marriage. How could I not notice this side of my wife's character? Esther seemed to think nothing of spending the night with another man and expected me to give her freedom or some sort of temporary break from the marriage without asking. That was not going to happen. The senator was a handsome, well-built man with great charisma, but I wasn't exactly a slouch myself. I'm 5 feet 11 inches with a medium build, broad shoulders, a small waist, and abs. I have thick dark brown hair cut short. I always thought I was a decent catch and never had a problem dating in high school and college. I began to think too much about what Esther was doing at that particular moment. I realized I would spend the entire night imagining her with someone else unless I managed to divert my thoughts. I decided I needed to focus on my children and not let myself be consumed by anger and betrayal. I had a wild idea. Several years ago, I bought 4 acres of lakefront land on Lake Margaret, about 200 miles north of our home. My intention was to build a lakeside cabin for weekends and family vacations. The property was almost square with a shoreline of just over 400 feet, and a stream flowed along the southern edge. I had only preliminary plans for its development so far. Turning to Eliza and Nate, I said, let's go hiking. Nate was the first to ask, where? To the lake where I bought the site for our cabin, I answered. They both jumped up with excitement. You mean tonight? Eliza asked. Yes, tonight, I confirmed. But Daddy, is it too late to go already? It's the 7th, she continued, and besides, we don't have any camping gear. I replied, it's not too late. We'll go to Ray's, buy everything we need, load it into the car, and then head out. It's about a 4-hour drive, but you'll probably sleep through most of it. I instructed the kids to gather backpacks, jackets, extra clothes, better outdoor shoes, swimsuits, and so on. I also asked them to bring some blankets and pillows for the car ride. Eliza went to the pantry and grabbed some snacks for the journey. While this was going on, I prepared a large thermos of black coffee for the long overnight trip. We headed to the sports store, knowing we might have forgotten something important. When we arrived at Ray's, a friendly saleswoman approached us. I told her we needed to buy everything for our camping trip. Fortunately, our saleswoman was a seasoned camping expert, having hiked the entire length of the Appalachian Trail and the Great Western Trail, a 3,100-mile journey from Mexico to Canada. She assured us there was nothing she didn't know about hiking and camping. We ended up buying, among other things, 2 3-second 3-person tents, 3 sleeping bags that can withstand temperatures down to 0 degrees Celsius, air mattresses, a folding table with 4 folding chairs, a 2-burner propane stove, camp pots and pans, utensils, and 2 rechargeable LED flashlights. My tiny SUV had a hard time fitting all our gear in the trunk. I had to put a few items on the front passenger seat. The saleswoman insisted we take a large refrigerator to keep the food fresh and to deter bears. She advised keeping it in a locked car overnight. I decided to return home to grab my Browning high-power 9mm semi-automatic pistol for added security and threw 4 rolls of toilet paper into the trunk. Before leaving home, I left Esther a handwritten note, "Gone on a hike. I'll be back in 3 to 4 days." I placed the note on the kitchen table and put my wedding ring on top. On the way out, I grabbed 2 bottles of my best bourbon. Once the excitement of shopping wore off, we realized we were hungry. I stopped for gas and picked up hamburgers, fries, and chocolate shakes at McDonald's to eat in the car. I also stopped at Safeway, which was open 24 hours, to buy milk, coffee, bacon, eggs, frozen French toast, bananas, butter, chocolate, trail mix, and a few other items. Although Alice and Nate talked excitedly about our camping adventure, they soon began to fall asleep. I was left alone with my thoughts that I tried to push into the background in preparation for the trip. Esther had hurt me deeply, and I didn't know if I still had love for her. How could someone who claims to love you be so cruel and disrespectful? I thought there was no good way to tell your husband that you're going to spend the night with another man. Did she really think there would be no consequences? Was she so deluded that she thought I would just forgive her? I would never agree to be a passive participant in such a situation. I thought about divorce and what it would mean for me financially. My biggest concern was not wanting to be a single dad, unable to see my kids except for every other weekend and a few weeks during the summer. If she came back full of sincere remorse, perhaps there could be a chance for reconciliation. Meanwhile, thoughts of revenge crossed my mind. There were many women who would be interested in me, but acting on this impulse would only make things worse, not better. I settled on one criterion: whatever I did had to be in the best interests of Alice and Nate. I cried quietly while driving. I didn't want to wake the kids. For hours later, I was near the site, but in the darkness, I wasn't entirely sure where I was. My iPhone GPS helped, but there were no roads in the area. I parked in the dark and decided to rest. I opened 1 bottle of bourbon and poured myself 2 shots into a plastic glass before falling asleep. I told myself next time I'd bring proper whiskey glasses. The next thing I remember is my daughter knocking on the window. "Daddy, Daddy, look at the deer." It was morning already, and the sun had just risen. My muscles were a little sore from the uncomfortable car seat. I opened the door just in time to see 4 or 5 deer disappearing into the woods. I told Alice and Nate, "If you're quiet and don't move when you see the deer, you won't scare them away. They might eventually get used to you if they realize you're not a threat." I decided in my head that next time, I would bring deer salt to the site to attract them. I would also bring carrots for the deer. Before setting up camp, we decided to explore the area. The forest was pristine, with more than 300 fallen trees. We walked along the road to the water, then along the shore to the creek, and finally returned to the car. During our hike, we found a clearing near the center of the property on a small flat hill overlooking the lake. We chose this spot for our camp. I dragged all our gear to the chosen campsite. Most of the items were still in boxes that we needed to open. The 3-second tents turned out to be a real convenience. All you had to do was lay out the tent on the ground and lift up the center handle, and it unfolded instantly. We unpacked our other camping supplies, and our camp started to take shape. I found 18 or 20 large rocks to place in the center of the camp for a fire pit. I sent the children to collect firewood. The forest was strewn with dry tree branches, and they gathered enough for the entire stay. I found some large branches to keep the fire going until late at night. Thus began our camping adventure. We all learned a lot about life in such a primitive environment. For example, I needed a flashlight and perhaps one of those headlamps. The children learned they would have to manage bathroom needs in the forest. I found a fallen log to serve as a support and used my army shovel to dig a hole for waste. I hadn't considered that while the children and I were setting up camp, Esther had to return home. I left my phone in the car most of the day. When I finally checked it, I noticed there was no cell service in this area. We camped, hiked, and even swam in the cold lake. On Sunday afternoon, we drove to the nearby town of Margaritaville, which was a small town that attracted campers and fishermen. We replenished our supplies with food and other essentials, like an axe. While we were in town, I noticed my cell phone had service again and was filled with text messages, emails, and voicemails from Esther. I chose not to read them but sent her a few photos and a short video of the kids enjoying their time at the campsite and by the lake. We stayed at Lake Margaret until Tuesday. That afternoon, we packed everything into the car and drove to a storage facility where we could leave most of our gear instead of carrying it home. The kids insisted on bringing at least one tent back so they could camp in the backyard. Even though it wasn't night, the children slept almost the entire way back. I had time to think about how I was going to address our marriage problems with Esther. I didn't want to engage in a loud, lengthy argument. I didn't want the children to witness any verbal confrontation. I decided to minimize my time with Esther and maximize my time with Alice and Nate. I sent Esther a text message when we were 2 hours away from home, telling her that we needed dinner and would arrive around 7 p.m. As we pulled into the driveway, Esther came out to meet us, dressed casually in shorts and a white blouse, with her hair in a ponytail. She gave me a hostile look, and I responded in kind. The children ran to her with hugs and kisses, excitedly talking about their adventures in the forest. I stood aside to let them have this moment and began unloading the car, placing items in the garage. Before Esther and the children disappeared into the house, she remarked, "Looks like you haven't spent the last 4 days explaining to them how terrible their mother is." After they went inside, I continued unloading the car when Abigail, a neighbor from a few doors down, approached me. To my surprise, she gave me a big, long hug. Abigail, a widow in her 50s, was an attractive woman with a good figure. "It's good to see you too, Abigail." "Looks like you missed me more than my wife did," I said. Abigail, serious now, replied, "I wanted to talk to you as soon as you got back. There's something you should know." I asked her what was on her mind. She said, "Around 1 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, I was running around the block when I saw a black limousine pull up in front of your house. 2 large men got out and blocked the sidewalk. As I stood there, wondering who they were and what they wanted, one of the men helped Esther out of the car. Then Senator Norberto came out of the limousine. They seemed to ignore me as I continued my run. I saw Norberto pull Esther towards him and kiss her. I heard Esther say something that sounded like "see you again." They shared one more kiss before Esther headed towards the house. As she passed me, she smiled but didn't say anything. The senator returned to his car and drove away. "I can't discuss this with you right now, Abigail, but we have problems at home," I said, referring to my marriage. "Thank you for this information. It will help me handle things." Abigail hugged me again. It was comforting, and as I mentioned, Abigail was an attractive woman with a great figure, so it was pleasant to hold her for a moment. "If you need anything I can help with, let me know. I'm usually here day and night," she said with a smile. When I finished unloading the camping equipment in the garage, I walked into the house. Esther had made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, probably the perfect dinner for both me and the kids. While the kids were around, Esther and I discussed family matters, but we both knew that after they went to bed, we would need to have a serious conversation. After bathing the children and preparing their clothes for the next day, I put them to bed by 8 p.m. They were still excited about their adventure and wanted to know when they could do it again. I went to the family room, poured myself 2 shots of bourbon, and waited for the confrontation. When Esther came down, she walked right up to my rocking chair, put her hands on her hips, and said, "You have a lot to explain." I simply smiled in response. "Go ahead," I replied, taking a sip of bourbon and waiting for her list of complaints. She started with, "Does your wedding ring on the kitchen table mean that you didn't want to be married to me anymore? While I was with Tom, I thought you'd have to be pretty close to a U.S. Senator to call him Tom. Well, I'm back home, and you can put your ring back on," she said, handing me my wedding ring. I looked at it for a few seconds, sighed, and slowly placed it on the nightstand next to my chair. "I don't need this anymore," I said. "What else do you have?" I asked. Esther continued, "This doesn't have to mean the end of our marriage. I know you're hurting, and I'm so sorry that I hurt you. However, it was something I felt I needed to do for myself. I'm not sorry. Tom was a wonderful partner. I was hoping for an apology for your actions, not because you hurt my feelings. It was a wonderful experience for me," she said with a dreamy look. "I wouldn't trade it for anything. I only wish I could have done it without you, but I expect you to get through it because you love me. This was a one-time event and will not affect us in the long term." At this point, I realized that finding a genuinely remorseful wife was unlikely. If Esther had shown sincere regret for her actions, I might have considered reconciliation, but it was clear that wasn't going to happen. I raised my glass and signaled for Esther to continue. "You just had to tell my parents, didn't you? How could you do that? This should have been a private matter between us. And don't forget the senator," I added. "He's not a jerk as you put it. He's an extremely attractive and charming person, an outstanding political figure with significant responsibilities. You should be glad he wanted to be with me. It was a magical night. Yes, you've already told me it was a wonderful experience. As for your parents, you seemed so content and confident that I began to wonder if I was being too puritanical. I lied and contacted your parents to get their opinion. Your mother noticed that you weren't in the conversation and asked about your whereabouts. When I told her you were on a date with the senator and were staying with him, she was shocked. Your father also called, and he didn't like it either. Their attitude is the same as mine, and I was as appropriately puritanical as I thought." Esther, clearly frustrated, said, "You should know that my mom and dad are the same. You'll have to be careful next time you see them." I replied, "I believe you've poisoned the children against me and spent the last few days teaching them how terrible their mother is. I would never do that, no matter how much you've hurt me or damaged our marriage." Esther shot back, "I didn't damage our marriage or destroy our family. The continuation of our marriage is up to you. A real man would have seen this as a great opportunity and wouldn't let his ego stop us from moving on." As if it was no big deal, Esther continued, "If you want to be vindictive and file for divorce, you'll end up being a father who sees his kids every other weekend." At that moment, I'd had enough. I threw my drink in her face. She stepped back, completely stunned by my unexpected reaction to her ultimatum. I stood up and walked towards her with clenched fists, my expression full of anger. This caused her to retreat until she fell onto the leather sofa, looking at me with fear, waiting to see how I would respond. I leaned over her and looked straight into her face. "Until a few weeks ago, I had the perfect wife. You were beautiful, gentle, and faithful. But something happened that changed everything almost instantly. You seemed to lose all respect for me. You were insolent and insulting. Before the date, you accused me of being petty with a sick mind. You openly flirted with the senator and humiliated me at a charity ball. You announced that you were going on a date with him and were going to spend the night with him. Now you're assuming that I'm not a real man and that I'm the problem. The worst part is that you threaten me with losing my children if I don't ignore your betrayal. You don't seem to understand the gravity of your situation, Esther. So listen carefully, I don't love you anymore. You destroyed that love the moment you walked up the door to be with someone else. I didn't realize it at the time, but I had several days and long nights to think about it. If it weren't for the children, I would have already filed for divorce. Hester tried to object. You can't mean it, Reggie. I know you love me. You're not listening, Hester, I said. I don't love you anymore. You destroyed that love when you betrayed me. I don't even want to touch you. You've compromised our marriage, and what's troubling is that you don't even realize how serious this is. If I had come home to a wife who was ashamed and truly remorseful, perhaps we could have had a chance at reconciliation. But you didn't even apologize for your actions. I said I was sorry, Hester interrupted. I hurt your feelings. That should be enough to forgive you and move on, she added. She still didn't understand and was selfishly blind to the storm she had caused. Understand this, Hester, I will never forgive you for what you did to me, our marriage, and our children. Never. I walked away from Hester, who took advantage of the less dramatic confrontation to gather her thoughts. So what are you going to do, Reggie? She asked. Are you going to file for divorce and try to get custody of the children? If I could, I would, I replied. But I doubt the courts will grant me custody of Alice and Nate, considering how young they are. Plus, you've been a good mother, and they need you at this time in their lives. However, from now on, my children are the only thing that matters to me. Although I really dislike your presence, I'll stay married to you for now and try to provide my kids with a normal family life. You can be sure that I will file for divorce when they are older. I will be cheerful and joyful when we're with the children. I will be polite and courteous when interacting with you. I'll even show affection and hug you or hold your hand if needed. But when we are alone, I do not want to have anything to do with you. Hester, through some sobs, asked, shall we sleep together? I've thought about sleeping in the guest bedroom, but I don't want the kids to see that kind of relationship between us, I said. I'll sleep in our bed with you, but I won't have any physical contact with you. You think you can resist me forever? Hester said. I know that you will not resist. Sooner or later, we will need each other, and then you will forgive me. If you're talking about physical contact, Hester, you should know that I now consider our marriage open. You're free to see whoever you want. Likewise, I will feel free to do the same. Unlike your last date, I'm extremely discreet and expect the same from you. I don't want anyone but you. It's you that I need, Reggie, Hester said. I know I hurt you deeply, but you're the only man for me. What I did was a one-time thing, and it won't happen again. Come on, I said. A little bird told me that you came home on Saturday afternoon around 1 p.m. My guess is you had been with the senator earlier that day and possibly again while you were taking a shower. You spent the night with him, so why not? Hester was outraged. Mind your own business, she exclaimed. Well, maybe you shouldn't be so obvious about it in front of our neighbors, I said. Hester tried to justify herself. It was just a goodbye kiss. I only said what I said to be polite and show that I had a good time. It seems to me that you will not hesitate to run to him when he returns to the city, I said. In fact, I have no doubt that if the senator came to our front door right now, you wouldn't hesitate to welcome him right away. Hester tried to defend herself again. I admit that I am strongly attracted to Tom, so much so that I took a risk to be with him. If you hadn't reacted the way you did, but rather forgiven me for this lapse in our marriage, I might have considered seeing him again. Next time, I would have been more discreet to avoid your finding out. It's good to know, I replied. But I don't trust you, and I don't want anyone who doesn't respect me as my wife. Moreover, I wouldn't want a wife who would betray me so deeply. Aside from the children, our marriage is over. We went to bed, Hester on her side, and I on mine. The last thing she said before I fell asleep was, "You will forgive me." I know you will forgive me. She spent most of the night crying and sobbing. I didn't care. The next day, our new routine began. Surprisingly, we managed to maintain a facade in front of Alice and Nate. Hester and I interacted more like roommates than husband and wife. She was pleasant and even seemed somewhat agreeable, like the Hester I knew before all this began. Occasionally, I would wake up with Hester curled up next to me or with us in a spooning position. As soon as I realized I was touching her, I would move to my side of the bed. One Friday afternoon, Hester approached me and said her parents wanted her and the children to stay with them for the weekend. I think they want to scold me because of what you told them. You mean the truth? I said. Well, maybe this is your opportunity to talk some sense into them, make them see that it's actually my fault. That's exactly what I'm going to do, she replied defiantly. When Hester returned on Sunday afternoon, she was silent and withdrawn. I cooked dinner for everyone and put the kids to bed after their bath. Hester sat silently on the patio the entire time. I walked outside with a glass of wine for each of us, lit a fire in the fire pit, and sat back to watch it burn. We were both silent until Hester spoke. Do you want to know what happened? She asked. I can imagine, I replied. They called me a fool. My dad said that if my mom had done to him what I did to you, he would have kicked her out of the house. My mom said she would expect the same if she did something similar to Daddy. I interjected. Didn't you explain to them that it was my fragile ego that prevented us from recovering from your experience with the senator? Of course, I explained, she said. They made fun of me. They said that any man with an ounce of pride and self-respect would have divorced me long ago. Only the children are keeping us together for now. For a minute, I thought her parents might have gotten through to her, but then she added, they just don't understand the nuances of modern marriage. I was disappointed that her mom and dad couldn't enlighten her. I poured my wine on the fire, went back into the house, and poured myself 2 shots of spiced rum. Returning to the patio with the bottle, I sat there long after Hester had gone to bed, eventually falling asleep on the patio chair. I woke up just before 2 a.m. and awkwardly went to the bedroom to crash. I knew I needed to distance myself, otherwise I might give in to Hester's persistent persuasion. I considered having physical contact with her to get some relief, but I knew she would interpret it as the beginning of forgiveness, and I didn't want to give her that satisfaction. So I came up with another plan. On Thursday, I told Hester that I had a date on Friday night and that I would be home late. What are you doing? She exclaimed. Here I am trying to make our marriage work by getting back into a relationship with you, and you're going on a date for fun? I certainly hope so, I said. Let me remind you that our marriage is over. We are only husband and wife on paper. We live together only for the benefit of the children. You've opened the door to dating outside our marriage, and as I've already said, we have an open marriage now. Who are you going out with? Hester demanded to know. It's none of your business, I replied and left. On Friday, I took the kids to my parents' house for the weekend, telling Hester that unlike her, I didn't want my children to see me dressed up for a night out without her. When Hester saw me coming down the stairs in a black 3-piece suit, I knew she was angry, but I didn't care. I may have begun to make her understand a little about what I was going through. Once on the landing a few steps above the floor, I did a little twirl, just as Hester had done before going out on a date. What do you think? I asked. I looked good, and I knew it. The fitted vest, black tie, and patent leather shoes gave me a formal appearance. When have you ever looked so good to me? Hester asked. Perhaps when I was in a tuxedo at the fundraising dinner where you first rejected me in favor of the senator, I replied. At least I didn't go buy a new suit for my date, unlike how you bought a new dress for yours. Hester clenched her teeth when I mentioned her date but was curious about my plans. First, we're going to have dinner at the Cosmos Club. Then we'll go to the City Theater to see the Purple Pimpernel. After that, we might go to a bar for a drink and a dance. And after that? Hester asked. We'll see how it goes. Maybe I'll take her home and then come back. It's just a first date, you never know what might happen, I said. I took the keys and left the house, leaving a distraught Hester to ponder our situation. On my way to the date, I stopped at a grocery store and bought a bouquet of flowers. Although I had known my date for several years, I was a bit nervous. I hadn't dated in over a decade. My companion looked stunning in a tight, elegant black cocktail dress with a high slit, high heels, and French-style stockings. The evening went as I had hoped: dinner, theater, and dancing. At the club, I asked the waiter to take a photo of us. My companion placed one hand on my shoulder while I held a glass of wine. I sent the photo to Hester. We had a great time, and by the end of the evening, we were both happy. I felt better and more confident than I had in months. When I took her home, I realized that I really liked her and respected her more than I expected. I enjoyed our conversation and decided not to pursue any physical contact. Instead, I kissed her goodbye on the porch, which lasted more than a minute. I carefully returned home, as I was likely close to being technically intoxicated. It was 1:30 a.m., and Hester was waiting for me, visibly angry. "You slept with Angie," she exclaimed. "You chose this. She's not even your friend, she's my friend, and now she'll spread around school that she had fun with you. How can I live with this?" Hester couldn't see that what she thought I did to her was exactly what she did to me, so I had no sympathy for her. I walked past her and up the stairs to the bedroom, exhausted. Hester decided to spend the night in the guest room. Late the next morning, I texted Angie to let her know that Hester thought I had slept with her and to be prepared for Hester to confront her about it. Hester remained angry all Saturday afternoon. "How would you feel if I went out and cheated?" she challenged me. "You already did," I reminded her. "Besides, I told you that you can do whatever you want." "I don't care." I spent my Saturday doing chores around the house. On Sunday, Hester was still angry, so I apologized and asked to pick up Alice and Nate from my parents' house. I stayed there most of the day. On Monday, returning from work, Hester was much more conciliatory. I didn't know why until I heard from Angie that Hester had been flirting with her in the staff room. It was then that Hester discovered Angie, and I hadn't had any physical contact since our date. Hester returned to the master bedroom and stated that my lack of involvement with Angie might mean I could still forgive her. I assured her that wasn't the case, but she continued to expect me to eventually come around. The new routine continued for several more weeks. I found out that one of our neighbors had spoken to Hester about the Libertines Club, suggesting that I no longer had to wonder what my neighbors were talking about. I had several supporters who offered help. One of them, Abigail, occasionally invited me to sit on her porch and have a drink, where neighbors might think we were involved in something intimate. Abigail noted that although she dated a lot and sometimes brought friends home, she kept a safe distance from the husbands on the block, as she couldn't afford to earn a bad reputation. Hester's mother was very supportive of my position and expressed understanding of my feelings. She fervently hoped that I could eventually forgive Hester and restore our marriage bond. We didn't raise Hester to be so foolish. Please don't think we are condoning her behavior. We understand it no better than you. I know you're only still together because of the kids, she told me. I hope this is enough to help you two find a path to reconciliation. I told her I didn't know how long I could continue like this, even for the sake of the children. I wanted a normal family environment for them, but it felt like everything was falling apart. The illusion that Esther was committed to reconciliation lasted only a month. Hester did not want to change the status quo other than to try to normalize our relationship as husband and wife. One night, after the kids were in bed and I was relaxing, watching a replay of the Cowboys vs. Patriots game that I had missed, Esther came into the living room. She turned off the lights until the room was only lit by the TV. Although I noticed her beauty, I was repulsed by the thought that the last person to be close to her was the senator. "Please, Reggie, if you don't want to be intimate with me, at least be with me," she said. "That won't happen, Hester," I replied. "You're probably the most beautiful woman I have ever known. However, I've had more relationships since school, and I thought they were all the most beautiful when I was with them. I'm sure I can feel this way about someone else in the future, but not you. I'm staying with you only to provide our children with a semblance of a normal family life." Esther became upset and retreated to the bedroom. I continued watching the football game. Suspicious of Esther's apparent desire to return to exclusivity, I quietly slipped out of bed after she had fallen asleep. I walked over to her nightstand, turned off her phone, and accessed it to check her messages and emails. I learned her digital login code so I could access her phone whenever I wanted. What I found did not convince me that Esther wanted our old relationship back. She was still in contact with the senator, who frequently praised their past meetings and promised a more discreet date in the future, hinting that he had slept with her. A month later, we organized a regional summer barbecue at our house. As the head cook, I spent most of my time outside at the grill. I needed to use the guest bathroom on the ground floor and walked past my office, where I heard women's voices and stopped to listen. I heard Esther saying it was the most exciting night of her life. She described how a prominent man had chosen her and how their time together had been wonderful. The women laughed, and one mentioned she would have to wait until her husband was away on a business trip to do something similar without being discovered. I was furious but managed to restrain myself from barging in. I went to the restroom and then returned to the patio, trying to cool down with a bottle of beer in hand. I realized that all my efforts to create a normal life for our children were in vain. There was no way to continue pretending with an unrepentant wife. It was time for a significant change. I noticed when Esther left the house with 3 other women, they looked at me and laughed. This was my signal. I hit the barbecue grill loudly with a spatula, drawing everyone's attention. I lined up on the patio and asked loudly, "Is there anyone here who doesn't know that my wife had an affair with Senator Noberto about 4 months ago?" Only one person hesitated before lowering their hand when I looked at them. "Are there any women who haven't heard Esther describe in detail the night she spent with him?" Only 2 out of 12 raised their hands. I assumed all the wives had told their husbands what they knew. "Well, ladies, there may be something you don't know that Esther may not have mentioned. I haven't been intimate with her since the night she effectively ended our marriage and destroyed the love I once had for her. The only reason I stayed in the house was to maintain the appearance of a normal family environment for our children, but now I realize that this is impossible, and I will no longer pretend. For those of you who might be tempted to seek excitement outside your marriage, I suggest you think twice. If any of you are considering pursuing such experiences, be aware that Esther is more than willing to engage if given the opportunity. If you're able to manage a brief escape from your commitments, you might find her more receptive than you'd expect. I want to make it clear that other than Abigail, none of you are welcome in my home anymore." I glanced at Abigail and gave her a smile, acknowledging her support. She understood. Having said this, I went inside. An upset Esther found me in the bedroom, packing several suitcases. "What the hell are you doing?" she demanded. "You embarrass me terribly in front of our friends." "I'm leaving," I replied. I was foolish to think I could spend the next 14 years pretending to be in a happy family environment with an unrepentant wife. Perhaps if you showed true remorse and sought help, we might have had a chance. But that doesn't seem likely now. "Where are you going to go? What about the kids? Are you just going to leave us?" she asked. "I need to get away from you," I said. "I'll talk to the kids before I go. I don't know where I'm going or what I'll do, but I'll reach out once I figure that out. In the meantime, don't try to contact me. I won't respond. I'll call home every evening to speak with the children before bed." "Please, Reggie, don't do this," Esther pleaded, realizing her efforts to reconcile were failing. "It's not that bad. We can still fix this. It's just a small obstacle compared to a long, wonderful life together. I am tired of humiliation, pain, and anger. That's all I feel when I'm around you. I'm going to make a change. I'm not sure what it will be yet, but I'll let you know when I figure it out." "You won't do this," she said angrily. "If you're thinking about divorce, then that's okay too. I was the perfect wife until I took some time for myself. Now, your high moral standards condemn me. I'm not apologizing anymore for my mistakes. If we're going to stay together as a family, you'll need to forgive me, or we'll need to consider divorce." "Be careful what you wish for," I countered. "I'd be happy to be in divorce court and explain that I'm leaving my wife because of her affair with a senator. Imagine how he'd react if you were named in a case like this. It could ruin his political aspirations." "You wouldn't do that to such a great man," Esther challenged. "In a heartbeat," I replied. Esther left the room, and I continued packing. If I forgot something important, I could return to the house when no one was around. I loaded my things into my car and walked around the house to the patio, which was now empty. The barbecue was still running, and someone had left plates of food unattended. Although most of the guests had gone home, my kids were still playing in the yard. "Where did everyone go, Daddy?" Eliza asked. I gathered the children and explained that I was leaving for a few days, but would call them every evening before bedtime. I asked Eliza to take care of her little brother. "Are you leaving because you're mad at Mom?" Eliza asked with a wisdom beyond her years. "Yes, I'm mad at Mom," I answered honestly. The realization hit me that despite our efforts to provide a normal family environment, we had only been fooling ourselves. The children sensed the tension, and I knew it was time to confront the situation head-on. I hugged my children for the last time, tears streaming down our faces. Esther stood by the car with one last plea. "Don't do this to us," she wailed. Ignoring her, I said, "I'll be back in a week or two. Don't try to contact me, I won't respond. However, I will call home every evening to speak with the children. If you need help with the kids, call my mom." I got into the car and drove away, unsure of my destination. My first stop was Iris Lounge, the club where I used to relax with my work colleagues. I told the hostess I planned to hang out at the bar for a few hours. I needed time to think about my next steps. Along with my bourbon and soda, I asked for paper and a pen. I started jotting down items, not prioritizing them at first, then organized them into a sequence of actions. My first task was straightforward. I needed a place to stay for the next few weeks. Conveniently, there was a Marriott hotel right across the street from the Iris Lounge. Though I was financially secure and could easily afford a few weeks in a hotel, I knew I needed something more permanent. I was familiar with the basics of divorce, but decided it was wise to consult a lawyer, particularly regarding custody of my children. I informed my boss about my situation, and he kindly granted me the time I needed to sort things out. I agreed to stay at the Marriott for a month, benefiting from a discounted long-stay rate and concierge privileges. My room was on the same floor as the concierge lounge, where breakfast and nearly dinner were served. There was also a computer workstation where I could handle my office work remotely. Over the next few weeks, I spent a lot of time at the hotel and at the Iris Lounge. The most significant development during this period was securing my living situation. I had to adjust my financial routine slightly, but it was manageable. After 4 weeks, I called Esther and told her I'd be home for a few days the following Friday. She mentioned that she was tired from handling the children and the house alone. She said the grass was overgrown, and I needed to cut it before receiving another notice from the Homeowners Association. She also asked if I could take the kids out for a while to give her some alone time. Esther seemed to take notice of my plans and asked, "What do you mean you'll be home for a few days? Aren't you planning on coming back for good?" I told her I would explain everything when I saw her. On Friday, as soon as the kids got home from school, I arrived in the new Nissan Rogue Murano Platinum. I was greeted with hugs and kisses from Elsie and Nate. Elsie was the first to comment on the new vehicle. "Oh my God, Dad, when did you buy this? We needed something bigger than the Rogue Sport to fit all our camping equipment and to tow our boat," I explained. Esther followed the children to the car but didn't attempt to greet me warmly. As the kids excitedly explored the car, she said, "I'm glad you're finally home. Now we can have dinner together, which is a change. I'll only be here until Sunday evening, then I'll be gone again for a few days." "I'll explain the schedule after dinner," I replied. The evening with the children went well. We didn't have plans for Friday night, so I suggested going to a movie and then for dessert. The kids loved the idea, and even Esther was enthusiastic about getting out of the house as a family. We chose a kid-friendly movie at a nearby theater and went to Baskin-Robbins for ice cream afterward. When we returned home, I gathered Esther and the children for a serious conversation. "As you know, your mom and I haven't been getting along well lately. We had some disagreements before I left, and I realized that if I stayed at home full-time, I would be very unhappy because your mom wants me to forgive her for what happened. This situation has caused me a lot of pain and anger." "You mean she went to the party without you?" Elsie asked, surprising Esther with her awareness of the situation. "Yes, that's right," I confirmed. "The problem was that I couldn't stay with your mom, but I couldn't stop being your dad. Your mom suggested that if I couldn't forgive her, maybe we should get a divorce. Divorce would mean I wouldn't see much of you, and I didn't want to lose the chance to be your dad. If I'm not around, your mom would have to handle everything, taking care of you, the house, the garden, cooking, shopping, maintaining the cars, etc. That's a huge responsibility, and it might leave her with little time to spend with you." I glanced at Esther as I spoke. "So, what I did was buy a townhouse not far from here. It's a nice 3-bedroom unit in a gated community with a large patio, 2 swimming pools, gas barbecues, and big tables with umbrellas. There's a children's playground and a small park at the townhouse. This will be my new home away from home. I made a large down payment a few weeks ago and plan to close in a week. My goal is to live in the townhouse but visit our home often. I'll try to come back every Friday after school and stay until I put you to bed on Sunday night. Additionally, I plan to visit on Tuesday or Wednesday evenings for dinner with the family. Elsie understood everything I said. Can we come to your place and swim in the pools? She asked. Of course, I replied. You can also stay the night if you want. I'll have a bedroom for each of you. This will be so much fun, exclaimed Elsie. Nate didn't fully grasp everything, but he seemed happy because Elsie was. After a few minutes of explanation, Esther and I sent the children to bed after bathing and reading to them. Once we were back in the family room, Esther asked, "So this is your answer to the divorce question?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Where did you get the money to buy a townhouse?" she asked. "I used the money we were saving for a lake house. I transferred funds from the Fidelity account to purchase the townhouse, which should appreciate in value similarly to the account. Given such a significant change, I thought it would have been worth discussing with me first." "How did you discuss your date with the senator with me?" I reminded her. She turned away, hurt, as if it wasn't fair for me to bring it up. Esther still had many questions. "Where have you been for the last 4 weeks? The office only said you were working from home." "I stayed at the Marriott," I explained. "It was very relaxing compared to home, room service, housekeeping, the gym, the pool, and concierge service. I spent most of my time there or at the Iris Club." "You made friends at the Iris Club?" Esther asked, implying I might have started a new relationship. "I met some nice people, but that's none of your business now. Just as what you do socially is your own business. Don't forget, you were the one who opened our marriage. I love you, Reggie. What I did was a one-time thing. I want you to be home with me and the kids. I don't want to be a single mother. I'll be home often enough to help out. I'll mow the lawn, take out the trash, and handle car maintenance. I will help with the responsibilities, but I won't be intimate with you. I'll sleep in the guest room." "But what about me?" Esther asked. "You have your friends from the Iris Club to keep you company. What should I do? If you're looking for company, maybe you should contact the senator. If he can't visit, perhaps one of his associates could entertain you. Realistically, you'll need to find someone local. If you have a date, I can take the kids to my place so they won't see you dressed up or when you get home. I was hoping we could be together again, just the two of us, like before all this. You don't understand, Esther. You still don't regret what happened and expect me to overlook that night. I don't trust that you wouldn't repeat the mistake, especially if I forgave you. I'm not willing to put myself in that position again. Despite the arrangement not being perfect, it worked well for both of us and the children. I was much more relaxed, and Esther was relieved from the burden of being a single mother. The agreement, while not ideal, was better than living together unhappily or divorcing. It was also financially manageable, even with the added mortgage. I took Elsie and Nate shopping for furniture for the townhouse. They felt involved in decorating it. I framed and hung their drawings from school on the walls. I gave them some freedom to decorate their own rooms. I started to enjoy my time as a bachelor without conflict, and I agreed with Esther to avoid discussing her night with the senator unless she brought it up. I knew that Esther still hoped I would forgive her and resume our marriage as it was before the incident. Over time, I began to make friends at the townhouse, usually meeting people by the pool on weekends when Elsie and Nate came to swim. They also made friends with the other kids at the pool, and I got to know their parents. I developed close relationships with several single moms in the townhouse complex, and we would often hang out together on weekends or meet by the pool in the evenings when the kids weren't around. They appreciated having someone nearby who could provide guidance and support to their children, something an absent father couldn't offer. I often took the time to teach their children to swim or ensure they were safe. Meanwhile, Esther took my advice and left the children with me for the weekend while she dated men she met at school and other places. She expressed that she missed the times we had together and longed for the affection and conversations we shared before the senator incident. Despite her longing for reconciliation, she was aware that our relationship had changed. Esther became curious about my new friends and the women I associated with. When she heard that my friends and I were having a barbecue at the townhouse, she asked if she could attend. I agreed. When we arrived at the townhouse pool, several tables had been pushed together, and my friends had prepared food for the afternoon. The children quickly connected with their friends and disappeared into the pool. As I prepared to grill hot dogs, hamburgers, and corn, Esther seemed particularly interested in my friends, who were very welcoming to her. Esther was puzzled by their kindness. Andrea, one of my friends, said, "We owe you a lot." "What did I do to deserve this?" Esther asked. Belle explained, "If you hadn't set up your husband, he wouldn't be here with us, and we wouldn't be enjoying his friendship." Esther looked at each of the women and asked, "Did you all have a relationship with him?" I was nearby, grilling, but heard the conversation. Andrea responded, "It's not your business." Belle added, "Reggie has been a great friend to us. He helps me with my son James, and his children are good friends with James." Roxy shared, "My husband became an alcoholic after losing his job. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore and divorced him. Reggie has helped me and my children in many ways without asking for anything in return. It's strange, but since the divorce, my ex has stopped drinking, and I think he misses his children and perhaps me more than the alcohol. Reggie's attentiveness has been a blessing." Carmen added, "My husband suffered from bipolar disorder and had a severe breakdown. He was admitted to a mental hospital and is not expected to recover. I love this man dearly and would do anything to keep him from suffering. Do you understand me?" Belle was the next one to reach out to Esther. She explained, "My husband was difficult, charming when things were good but aggressive when he was frustrated. Initially, it was verbal aggression, then physical pushing. When he raised his hand to me, I knew I had to leave. I found refuge in an orphanage and used my education to secure a job as a librarian. Eventually, I moved to the gardens." Belle continued, "You may want to know that I spent time with your husband. We went camping together, and although we had our own sleeping arrangements initially, I persuaded him to use one large sleeping bag. He initially resisted but later told me he appreciated the opportunity to share that experience with me. I'll always remember how he complimented me and how much I value his friendship. Even if he never marries me, I know he cares for me deeply." Kate then spoke up, "I spent time with Reggie, but we never had an intimate relationship. I'm a widow. My husband, a soldier, passed away a year ago. I've been trying to move forward while taking care of my children, Julia and Brad. When Reggie asked me out a few weeks ago, I was surprised. I had been struggling with grief and loneliness, and our date was a welcome distraction. Reggie reminded me of my late husband in many ways, and even though I wasn't ready for an intimate relationship, he was understanding and supportive." Kate added, "Reggie is the kindest person I've ever known. It's surprising to hear how poorly Esther treated him, given how much he's supported us. You threw away a chance at a truly wonderful relationship for a brief encounter with someone who was not a good match for you." Andrea chimed in, "We think you're making a huge mistake. All our past partners have had their issues, but you had a perfect man who could have loved you for years. You traded that for a fleeting experience that doesn't compare." Roxy, the group's mathematician, said, "If the senator was twice as satisfying as Reggie, you'd have to be with Reggie twice as often to match that satisfaction over the years. Reggie could have been with you on average 100 days a year, which totals 5,000 encounters over a lifetime. You've traded one wonderful experience with the senator for 2,500 equivalent encounters with your husband. It doesn't seem like a good deal." Esther protested, "I never meant to trade Reggie for anyone. I thought he would be unhappy for a while but would eventually see that I wanted to be a good wife for him again." Kate asked, "What made you think that would work?" Esther responded, "Especially because we have children, he needs to come home and save his family." Kate replied, "In our opinion, he already tried to do that. You continued to remind him of your past experience and even bragged about it. You humiliated him and pushed him away." Carmen added, "If I did that to my husband, I wouldn't expect him to forgive me. I'd lose respect for him if he did, as it would show he's weak. Reggie decided to live with you rather than destroy his family, and you lost respect for him in the process." Esther was taken aback by the criticism from my friends. She stepped back from the conversation and watched her children playing in the pool. Kate eventually brought her back to reality by suggesting they go to the pool to pick up the children and announcing that the hot dogs and hamburgers were ready. Carmen suggested making Esther a plate of potato salad and baked beans. Esther was again amazed at how well these women treated her despite the difficulties in her marriage. They spent the rest of the day chatting about their jobs, children, and social lives. As the evening approached and people began to wind down, Esther received a sincere invitation to return any time. They even offered to babysit her children if she needed help. After bringing her family back to the gardens, Esther told the girls they could use the double bed in the guest bedroom for a sleepover. The girls had become close friends despite only knowing each other for a few months. Once the children were inside, Esther asked to speak with me alone. As soon as the children left, Esther turned to me. "These women adore you. Do you know that? They did a lot to restore my confidence after I made it clear that I wanted another man more than I wanted you. I owe them a lot." I replied, "You once adored me too." "Yes," Esther said. "I don't know when or how I lost that feeling for you. It probably started the night of the charity ball when I met Tom. He was so eloquent and charming. He called me a few days later, and we talked for over an hour. He said he was attracted to me and complimented me on my appearance. He even suggested that if we had met that night, he might have invited me to his hotel." Esther continued, "A few days later, he invited me to lunch at an exclusive club, where we talked more and shared a kiss. He asked me to be his date for a charity event, suggesting it would be a plausible reason for us to spend time together. He implied that you wouldn't mind and that he was flattered by my presence." I exclaimed, "What nonsense!" "Yes, it was nonsense," Esther agreed. "It seemed to me that I had some sort of epiphany after our conversation at the barbecue. I realized that you would never come back to me, would you?" "No," I said. "You've hurt me too much. I can't let you put me in that position again. I will never be able to trust you. I'd be afraid you'd end up in a similar situation again. I won't risk it." Esther began to cry. "How could I be so stupid?" she sobbed. I didn't answer her. "You know what's worse, Reggie," she said. "Looking back, I don't think my experience with Tom was that great. I was excited because I was going to spend time with someone charming. But after the initial excitement, it wasn't as fulfilling or romantic as I had imagined. I didn't want to admit to myself that it wasn't what I expected. I should have been honest about how I felt." Esther continued, "What I miss the most is being with you and having our familiar routine. I regret what I did and feel ashamed. I would do anything to fix this. Your friends are right, I was foolish. I'm so sorry I hurt you." I was surprised by Esther's sincere remorse. "I wish you could have felt this way right after your date," I said. "Perhaps there might have been a chance to save our marriage." "Well," Esther replied, "we are still a family of sorts. We are both committed to our children and have found a reasonable way to raise them together. I guess that's the best we can hope for." I suggested, "Let's go inside and put the kids to bed." Esther agreed, and I opened her car door. She got out and then suddenly hugged me tightly. We stood there for a minute, neither of us saying anything, before she released me and we went into the house. Esther went into the master bathroom first to wash her face and wipe away her tears before letting the girls see her. Our agreement was normalized, and most importantly, our children were happy. We had done a surprisingly good job of organizing our schedules. I often had dinner at home, and Esther frequently visited me at my townhouse. Esther became friends with my friends, and we would sit on the patio and have drinks from time to time. We did a lot of things together as a family, such as going to the movies, taking day trips, visiting grandparents, and attending holiday events. Esther and I dated sparingly but never really involved the children in our social life. I learned that Esther dated one of the physical education teachers from her school quite often. A year had passed since the charity ball and the beginning of the collapse of my marriage. Now that my personal life was more in order and I had moved past much of the anger, pain, and humiliation I felt immediately after Esther's betrayal, my thoughts turned to the senator. I learned that the senator would be attending the charity ball as he did every year, and a few weeks after that, he would be the center of attention at the annual charity dinner. I started planning my response. The first thing I did was register on an escort service website. After passing all the character and financial checks, I was able to view the profiles of various individuals. I wanted someone who was not too young, perhaps between 30 and 40 or early 40s. Another requirement was a notable presence and the ability to make a strong impression. In the end, I chose someone named Wendy Vanek. According to her photos, She had a great figure, a beautiful face, and, importantly, a presence that fit my needs. She was about 45 years old with slight wrinkles on her face. I met her for coffee, and we talked. I learned that she had a lively personality, which was probably essential for her profession. After establishing a friendly relationship, I explained my plan. Although I wasn't sure she would want to participate, she was enthusiastic when she learned it was about a senator who had wronged me. Next, I needed to find a private investigation agency for the surveillance. When I mentioned wanting video footage of the senator in his hotel room, some agencies hesitated due to the potentially illegal nature of the request. However, one agency recommended an individual contractor who was actually an unlicensed private detective specializing in surveillance. I contacted this person, who identified himself as Lance Sterling. Although I knew that wasn't his real name, it didn't matter. According to Lance, he worked as an electronic surveillance expert for the FBI before leaving due to questionable activities he was involved in at his superior's request. When the FBI couldn't get a surveillance warrant, they sometimes relied on Lance to conduct illegal surveillance. When this was discovered, several agents were fired or demoted, and Lance was also demoted. Rather than resign to a lackluster career, he quit and became a freelancer. He added with a chuckle that the FBI still occasionally used his services. I described to Lance what I needed. I wanted Senator Norberto's hotel room equipped with video and audio systems on the night of the charity ball. Lance found the task interesting, noting that the more challenging it was, the more appealing it became to him. A few days later, he informed me that it would be difficult but achievable. He described issues with hotel security, including extra measures due to the senator's presence, and difficulties accessing the 17th floor where the senator's suite was located. He also mentioned that while the senator was away, his room was left unguarded. The setup was costly, but I considered it worthwhile. A few days before the charity ball, Lance confirmed that the senator's suite had been equipped. He installed 7 high-definition video cameras that could record in various lighting conditions, and 5 highly sensitive microphones. All the footage was transmitted to a central recording system located in the hotel room directly below the senator's suite, which Lance rented for the night of the charity ball. I picked Wendy up from her apartment on the night of the event. She was dressed elegantly in a floor-length red dress with a thigh-high slit. Her top was an off-the-shoulder style that drew attention. She was the ideal choice for my plan against the senator. The only accessory I added was a large diamond brooch, which contained a microphone connected to the earpiece I wore and a digital recording disc I carried with me. On the way to the charity ball, I once again briefed Wendy on my expectations. I wanted her to engage the senator in conversation, getting him to talk about himself, his accomplishments, and his preferences. I aimed for him to boast about his charm and his encounters, particularly his interest in married women. Wendy, experienced in eliciting such information, assured me she understood perfectly and would handle it well. Before she entered the venue, I gave her a large, flashy wedding ring and an engagement ring to further entice the senator. Wendy was instructed to take a seat at a table directly in front of the VIP table where the senator could easily see her and notice her alone. I parked the car and entered the club a few minutes later. Although I didn't think the senator would remember me, I kept a low profile at the bar, observing Wendy. During the first hour, the event was social. People mingled, discussed various topics, and admired each other's attire. I saw the senator make his grand entrance with a group of local politicians. Throughout the social hour, he moved around the room, greeting supporters and engaging with many women. Eventually, he noticed Wendy, glancing at her several times before approaching. "Excuse me, miss," he began, "but do I see that you are here alone?" Wendy looked up, feigning surprise. "Oh my, you're Senator Norberto, aren't you? I've heard so many good things about you." "Yes, it's me," the senator replied, looking her over. "If I may ask, are you here alone? You don't seem to have a companion." "No, I'm alone today," Wendy responded. "My husband was called away on a business trip. I was so upset that I decided to come alone. I was supposed to meet my friends here, but they had a family emergency, so now I'm here by myself." "May I ask your name?" the senator continued. "My name is Wendy Jones," Wendy answered. The senator took her hand and kissed the back of it. "I cannot allow such a beautiful lady to be alone on such an evening." Let me invite you to my table for dinner. I have several people who would be glad to meet you." "I can't do that, Senator." "Your table is already occupied," Wendy replied. "I'll see what I can do," the senator said. He signaled to one of his guards, whispered something in his ear, and then returned to his conversation with Wendy. I noticed the guard approach the senator's table, and shortly after, one of the guests stood up and left, looking displeased. The senator continued to charm Wendy, who pretended to be captivated by his attention. When the senator's bodyguard signaled that the table was ready, Wendy was led to the main table. The senator introduced her to the guests, explaining that Wendy was alone and he did not want her to feel excluded from the event. Some couples at the table seemed to recognize the senator's reputation. As the evening continued, the senator shared stories about his life in Washington, made jokes about politics, and spoke about his effectiveness in the Senate. Wendy pretended to be interested and engaged. Over time, the senator's touches became more frequent, and Wendy responded as if she was enchanted by his attention. As dessert plates were cleared and coffee was served, the host took the podium to make announcements and introduce the guests of honor, including the senator. After his professional remarks, the presenter announced the start of the dance program. The senator asked Wendy to dance with him, hoping to escape from his constituents. Wendy agreed, and they danced a slow dance. The senator, being an adept dancer, skillfully led Wendy through the movements. After the song ended, there was polite applause. The next tune was also slow, and the senator drew Wendy close, wrapping his arms around her waist. Despite having to dance with the wives of some supporters, they spent most of the time together. Wendy and the senator's embrace became more intimate as the evening progressed. The senator, having made significant advances, eventually guided Wendy towards the back exit of the country club and into the garden. There, he kissed her with increasing intensity. Wendy responded warmly, and the senator expressed that since he first saw her, he hadn't been able to get her out of his mind. Wendy, catching her breath, asked where they could go. The senator suggested his hotel room. He summoned one of his bodyguards and instructed him to prepare the car. As the senator escorted Wendy to the entrance, I went to the parking lot to get my car. I followed them to the Hilton, parking behind the senator's vehicle and watching as he ushered Wendy into the lobby and towards the elevators. Instead of going to the 17th floor, where the senator was headed, I went to the 16th floor to the room Lance had rented for surveillance. The room was dimly lit by a large video monitor displaying the setup Lance had prepared. Lance showed me the video channels and enlarged the view of the senator's room. As the senator and Wendy entered, Lance focused on the suite's living area. The senator proudly showed Wendy around, explaining the high cost of his accommodations and the perks he received. The senator took Wendy out onto the veranda to enjoy the city view. As Wendy leaned on the railing, the senator embraced her and kissed her gently on the back of the head. They continued their affectionate interaction, and it became evident that Wendy was deeply engaged in her role. For the next 2 hours, Lance and I observed as the senator and Wendy spent time together. Wendy complimented him and inquired about his preferences and experiences. The senator, eager to boast, shared details about his personal life and preferences. Lance and I reviewed the footage, and I noted key moments for the video presentation. I also requested that Wendy's face be blurred to keep her identity confidential. While the senator and Wendy rested, I fell asleep on the sofa, and Lance took a short nap as well. We set up the equipment to alert us if any further activity occurred. The next morning, the senator had a brief encounter with Wendy before showering. When he emerged, he thanked Wendy for the night and informed her that he had several meetings to attend. He asked her to dress and leave promptly, and one of his bodyguards was dispatched to assist her. He mentioned that one of his bodyguards would watch Wendy until she left the room, and she would need to arrange her own transportation home. Once the senator departed, I texted Wendy to meet me in the hotel lobby in an hour. Her reply was straightforward: "You can buy me breakfast." Meanwhile, Lance was packing up his equipment, and we agreed to meet the next day to start editing the footage. I met Wendy at the hotel restaurant. She was still in her evening dress from the previous night, unfazed by the attention from other hotel guests. As soon as she sat down, she said, "Now I understand why you call him Senator Idiot." After we ordered breakfast, I thanked Wendy for her work. "You did great." I'm sure I have more than enough material to deal with the senator." Wendy then shifted the topic. "You must have loved your wife a lot to go through all this trouble." I replied, I was deeply hurt when she announced she was going on a date with the senator. I tried to salvage our marriage for the sake of the children, but it was clear to everyone how things were, and I was left humiliated. I eventually left and found my own path, making new friends. I didn't want a divorce, and neither did Esther, but we settled for an informal separation. I still see my children and avoid the financial and emotional strain of a formal divorce." Wendy responded empathetically. She shared that she had gone through a divorce years earlier and noted, "Divorce isn't beneficial for anyone, especially children." Wendy and I parted on friendly terms, with her inviting me to dinner or a movie, no strings attached, as she felt I owed her a nice evening after our experience. The next day, Lance and I began working on editing the recordings. Within 2 weeks, we compiled a collection of scenes and statements that would be highly damaging to the senator. The senator's annual fundraising dinner took place 3 weeks after the charity ball. It was expensive, but I purchased 2 tickets. When Esther found out, she asked what interested me in the senator. I simply replied that I owed him. I asked Belle if she would help me with my plan to get revenge. She was eager to participate in a bit of mischief at such an elegant event. I told her I needed her to attract the senator's attention and suggested she buy a gown that highlighted her features. She insisted I accompany her shopping, and we visited several high-end fashion stores until we found the perfect dress, a dark blue strapless gown with a thigh-high slit. Belle also picked out blue high heels, a sea green pendant necklace, and matching earrings. We arrived at the country club for the fundraising dinner on time. I was in a tuxedo, and Belle's ball gown made quite an impression. After presenting our tickets, we were seated at a round table for 10, not too close to where the senator was seated with his party, but not too far either. 3 other couples were already at the table, and we introduced ourselves. When asked about my connection to Senator Norberto, I simply said I had met him once and hoped to speak with him during the evening. The guests at our table were all ardent conservatives, fitting for a $508 event. Belle and I used the social hour to wander around the ballroom, viewing political posters and chatting with other attendees. Several men were interested in Belle's company. About 30 minutes after most guests had arrived, the senator made his grand entrance, surrounded by political associates and friends. His commanding presence and charisma were evident, and he was clearly well regarded by the crowd. His bodyguards managed the crowd to keep him from being overwhelmed, allowing him to greet and shake hands with those he knew. Many of the people at his table wanted to express their gratitude to him. He was an experienced politician. Shortly after Belle and I returned to our table, we heard the bell signaling that dinner was ready to be served. After about 15 minutes, the salad arrived, followed by the main course. The staff was efficient, and dessert and coffee were served promptly. The host announced a 20-minute break before the performances began. I told Belle to take a break but not to return until everyone was seated again and introduced. When she came back, she clearly stood out in her beautiful blue dress. Even the presenter seemed momentarily distracted by her presence. I had no doubt that the senator had noticed her as well. Throughout the evening, Belle and I enjoyed each other's company. When we weren't eating, we held hands, and she often touched my arm or shoulder. I leaned over and kissed her shoulder, which she seemed to appreciate. After some awards and speeches, the senator gave a compelling call to action that received a standing ovation. The presenter then announced another break during which dancing would begin. I anticipated quick action from the senator, but it took longer than expected because several people surrounded him. Eventually, he motioned for his bodyguards to clear the way so he could move toward us. The band started with an upbeat dance tune, and Belle and I took to the floor. I was a skilled dancer, and Belle followed well, making the most of the dance floor. When the music stopped, we received applause from other dancers and guests nearby. I walked Belle back to our table and informed her that I was going to get us drinks. I asked her to expect a visit from the senator soon. The bar was crowded, so it took me a bit longer to return. When I approached our table, I saw the senator sitting in my seat, facing Belle with his hand on her knee. At first, a bodyguard tried to stop me, saying the senator was speaking to a constituent. I firmly stated that the senator was speaking to my companion, and I intended to sit down. The bodyguard let me through, and I walked up to the table, turning to Belle. I told her I had her drink and placed it on the table. Belle stood up, creating a brief surprise for the senator. She then suggested that the senator and I might want to talk, stepping aside. I took her chair and faced the senator, who seemed puzzled by the sudden shift in conversation. "Senator, I need to talk to you about something," I said. The senator, slightly taken aback, asked what the topic was. "Revenge," I replied. "Revenge?" he asked, looking confused. "You don't remember me, Senator?" "No, I don't," he said. "My name is Gavin Riginal," I said. "I'm sure you don't remember me, but perhaps you remember my wife, Esther." The senator paused, then recalled Esther. "Oh, I remember Esther. What a beautiful woman. I hope I didn't cause any trouble for you." The senator laughed, but I didn't respond to his remark. "Well, Senator, I don't know if you ruined it or not. I haven't had any relationship with her since that night. However, you ruined my marriage, and that's why I'm here tonight, to get revenge. You ruined my life, and now I'm going to ruin yours." The senator replied, "And how do you plan to do that? Don't forget that I am a United States Senator. If you even think about harming me, I will crush you socially, financially, and if necessary, physically. Others have tried before you, and they all lie in the dust." I tilted my head back, and Belle handed me a small gift box. "This is for you, Senator. This is the end of your life as you know it." The senator was skeptical but curious. He didn't think it was a bomb but decided to be cautious. He handed the box to one of his bodyguards and instructed him to open it at a distance. The senator turned to me and asked, "Why go through the trouble of introducing yourself? You could have just left the box." I replied, "Real revenge requires that the person who wronged me understands exactly what the revenge is for. In this case, you destroyed my marriage. But revenge must also inflict significant retribution on the offender, far exceeding the amount of pain caused." At that moment, the bodyguard returned and reported, "There's nothing in the box except a flash drive and a piece of paper with a web address." The senator's expression grew worried. "Go get your laptop," he commanded. "Find out what's on it." The bodyguard disappeared into the crowd. The senator continued, "Whatever it is, it won't harm me. I've survived political attacks, lawsuits, and negative press. I am a great senator and know how to manipulate the system and people. As for women, I believe they are God's gift to men, and I don't regret my actions." The worried bodyguard returned, saying, "Senator, you need to see this. It's bad." The senator, clearly troubled, followed the bodyguard into the crowd, pushing past people who wanted his attention. Belle and I decided it was time to leave. We walked past each table, leaving a small box with a ribbon and a tag that read Senator Norberto's compliments. We made sure to leave a box for each VIP at the main table. By the time Belle came downstairs, I had breakfast ready, including a mimosa. We tuned the TV to a news station, wondering how long it would take for the process to start. It didn't take long. Fox News was the first to report that an unverified video of Senator Tom Norberto was circulating online, showing him in a compromising situation with a married woman. Later that morning, MSNBC reported that video experts confirmed the video was authentic and unaltered. The senator's voice was verified through voice recognition software. I called Esther and told her about the video circulating online. I suggested she watch it as it had already reached the news services, and that reporters would likely want to speak with her due to the public nature of her date with the senator. She was not pleased with the news. By the evening, television reporters were interviewing the senator's colleagues about his comments in the video. Thanks to Wendy's ability to get the senator to brag about himself, we learned about his views on women and how he treated them. The revelations from the video led to the senator being forced to resign within 2 weeks. Unfortunately for him, this was just the beginning of his troubles. Numerous official investigations into his finances were launched, and many civil suits were filed against him, mostly by husbands. The senator was condemned by all his Washington colleagues. His non-political friends deserted him, and even his extended family was so embarrassed and ashamed that they disowned him completely. Esther and I managed to avoid any significant involvement in the scandal. The press had much more pressing issues, and there were so many other divorces and controversies that ours went largely unnoticed. Esther asked me if I was responsible for any of the senator's problems. I replied, maybe. Over the next few weeks, we watched the senator's career come to a disreputable end. He was eventually expelled from the Senate and stripped of his title. He returned to our home state, where he was once respected, but his party and local associates quickly condemned him. Lawsuits drained his bank account, and even his generous pension wasn't enough to keep him solvent. He soon owed several $1 million in legal fees, and his luxurious home was sold to help pay off his debts. Bombarded with serious threats, he disappeared completely. An investigative reporter eventually discovered he was selling used cars in Central Florida. His distinctive voice and charm made him successful in this new role, though he grew a beard and went by his middle name to avoid recognition. Esther and I continued our informal separation and casual relationship, which became the norm for almost 2 years. The children seemed to adjust to our separation without lasting emotional trauma. I believe the time and affection we devoted to them separately was greater than if we had remained married. Eventually, I fell in love again, this time with Kate. Our relationship developed slowly until we realized we wanted to be together forever. I had a wonderful relationship with her children, and my children loved her very much. We envisioned a wonderful future together, except for the fact that I was still married to Esther. For the first time, I considered divorce but was unsure how it would affect the status quo that seemed to be working well. As it turned out, Esther had been dating a man named Dan Matthews for over a year. He was her school's math teacher and swimming and polo coach. What started as a friendship developed into a deeper relationship. Dan was a widower with a young son, and he wanted a family and a mother for his child. My children met him and thought he was a good person. I also met him, and he seemed like a regular guy who genuinely cared for Esther. He understood why Esther and I had broken up and was confident she would never repeat her past mistakes. I was too. Esther and I filed for divorce, which was straightforward. She continued to run the house, and the children's lives went on uninterrupted. I kept my townhouse and lakefront lot, where I eventually built a 4-bedroom cottage. The remaining assets were divided fairly. Kate and I had a small but beautiful wedding with about 25 friends in attendance. My divorced friends were there as bridesmaids, and Elsie was one of them. Since I didn't have many male friends, I asked my son to be the best man and Kate's son to be the ring bearer. Kate's daughter was our flower girl. Esther and Dan attended the wedding, and 2 months later, they got married. I was happy to be married again. I was never cut out to be a middle-aged bachelor, even with all the privileges. I felt especially lucky to be married to Kate, who was not only physically beautiful but also a wonderful, loving companion and friend. Our main challenge was balancing our family life between my kids living with me and Kate or with Esther and Dan. We had to juggle our social lives, but we managed well. Sometimes we all went on hikes together. Dan and I became good friends, and Kate and I would occasionally go on double dates with Dan and Esther. Despite the complexities of our relationships, everything was fine. All the children came together to form a happy, well-adjusted next generation. We looked forward to years of holidays, birthdays, graduations, weddings, and grandchildren. What do you think of our story today? I think they had a very kind neighbor who wanted to help the husband find out what his wife was doing. What's your impression? Write in the comments. Until new videos.